We're talking to one person, and that was the President of the United States, sort of like employing his language, his demeanor, pounding the table, that kind of acting that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks.
Well, and that just makes it harder for people like Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski. These are people who probably most likely want to make it to the president's side on as many votes as they can. But when you have a day laid out like yesterday, Elise Jordan, much more difficult to do. And again, everybody's always playing for the president when they're in that position, making fools of themselves by lying in front of the United States Supreme Court's Chief Justice, while you have the other side just surgically going through the facts, laying them out in a way that can't be contradicted. And again, it puts Cory Gardner, I don't know if he was taking studious notes or, updating his resume for LinkedIn, but unless he approaches this in a serious way, you know what? He may have to update his resume because the voters of Colorado are going to kick him out. I'd say the same, even though she doesn't know it yet, of Martha McSally, of Susan Collins, of Thom Tillis. There are a lot of these Republicans that don't understand how much trouble they're in. And it would behoove them to actually take this process seriously and actually vote with their hearts and their constituents and their minds instead of blindly being obsequious to Donald J. Trump, former failed reality TV star who will be in Mar-a-Lago this time next year while they're looking for new jobs.
Joe, you bring up an interesting point, the contrast in the president's representatives and how the Democrats managers are presenting their case. And I did wonder yesterday, if you're Senator Cory Gardner and you watch your fellow Colorado Congressman Jason Crow come up and give a really stirring presentation and talking about how, back in 2003 when he was a soldier in Iraq, he was going around the streets of Baghdad with fellow troops looking for scrap metal. And contrast that, someone talking about what the stakes are, to just the nonsense that was coming out of the president's legal team. And it almost just seemed like the president's legal team, they weren't prepared with the little, tricks of the trade, having slides, having, just more nuanced presentations. And they just got up and treated it like a Fox News hit. And I don't think that's what exactly is going to woo Mitt Romney and Susan Collins and Cory Gardner. If they're,
Elise,
or maybe it will.
It's interesting. It's interesting, Elise. I'm glad you brought up that the Fox News bubble that these people live in. Because I remember growing up, and I remember reading an article about John Roberts, and I think it was Grover Norquist who explained the reason he was such a good student and so good on his feet in those hearings was, he said, when you were a conservative at Harvard Law School, if you opened your mouth, you knew you were going to get your head knocked off by the other students, so you had to have all of your arguments together. And that was always my belief, and I'm sure it was your belief too, that is, a small government conservative, when you were in college or law school, even in southern state schools, I found, you better have your arguments together or you're going to get your head knocked off. Whereas a lot of liberals could just be lazy intellectually, argue whatever they wanted to argue, and whether it was in academia or whether it was in newsrooms or whether it was in Hollywood, they would be, they'd get confirmation. Oh, that's so smart. That's so insightful. And so as a conservative, you always had to be sharper. Here, and I think it's why conservatives learned how to win elections so much more effectively than Democrats. Now here we are in 2020, and it's the Trumpists, it's the conservatives, it's the right wing that's created this bubble. They go into that bubble. They don't know what exists outside of that bubble as far as for making arguments. We saw this of Mitt Romney in 2012. He watched Fox News. He looked at Gallup polls and was sure he was going to win when the rest of America knew he was headed to defeat. Isn't that bizarre that conservatives have now, like liberals used to, created their own echo chamber online, on Fox News, in newspapers of their choice, and it allows them to live very comfortably in their 42%. They have no idea what's coming in November.
It does not surprise me, though. It stems from the top. When you have the leader of your party, someone who's such a storied intellectual, such as Donald Trump, it's unsurprising that facts do not matter, logic doesn't matter. The, basic implications of policy decisions aren't a consideration when you're just off in conspiracy la-la land. And so, of course, the party is going to follow that lead. And wow, it's just, talk about a different era when Republicans did have to come armed with facts. And maybe Trump's strategy will ultimately get him acquittal in this trial. I mean, obviously, he is going to probably be acquitted. But I wonder if come November, voters are just going to be tired of it.
Yeah, let's go to John Heimlin right now. He's on the campaign trail in Iowa. And, of course, everybody knows that campaign trail to Iowa starts with a layover at O'Hare Airport. John, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I'm not so curious as to how you think yesterday will impact the Democratic race, because I'm not so sure Iowa voters are focused on it as closely as they are. But I am curious, so overall, looking at those 5 or 6 Republican senators who are in political trouble right now, who have to at least pretend like they're going to look at the facts and the evidence in a fair manner, how do you think yesterday played to that audience?
Well, I think, Joe, you guys have been saying smart stuff about it so far this morning. I think if you are not partisan and you watched yesterday, even if you were, as long as you weren't on the very, very, very crazy far right, you had to be impressed with Adam Schiff. And, you guys have made the right point here. It was kind of a tour de force, I thought, on his, just as a performance thing. And the way in which the Democratic House managers laid out the case, I think they did put a lot of pressure not only did they get to make the case early when not knowing how much time they would have later on, but I think they also applied maximum pressure from the start on those particular Republican senators who they are very much focused on in terms of trying to apply the maximum, put them in the maximum political bind. And I do think that if you are Cory Gardner, if you are Susan Collins, we saw Susan Collins was in the middle of some of the discussions yesterday that caused some of the tweaks to McConnell's initial proposal, the things that he had put forward the previous night, in the middle of the night, to try to compress and deviate from the Clinton rules. Some of those things got changed yesterday, and at least not in a huge way, but in ways where Democrats won some small victories, and I think they won them largely because they were able to put pressure on people like Susan Collins, who recognized that the president's team and Mitch McConnell were leading them into what is going to be, if not a trap, is going to be not a great set of political circumstances for them. So I think that it's right. Garrett, I think, said, the great drama here is now, we always knew that the witness votes were going to be the drama, but if you look at the way in which the House managers handled themselves, and you look at the way the White House lawyers did in terms of competence and with a seeming kind of numbness or blindness to the politics for those senators, I think it's going to be really interesting when we get to the end of next week, because it did seem to me like a mismatched fight yesterday, purely on the politics.
Yeah. I was really surprised by how incompetent and how unprepared the president's lawyers were. I felt this at times about the Republican lawyers that went over and argued our case in front of the Senate back in 1999. I just sat there pulling my hair out And time and time again. I mean, there have been several times this year that I thought the Democratic committees did a very poor job in pushing forward their case. But yesterday, the Democrats were on top of their game, and I'm just curious if you were surprised at how incompetent and how ill-prepared the president's lawyers were when the stakes were so high for Donald Trump.